Oh, it would probably help if I brought the freaking camera on. God, so professional. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Shadow and Sun Show, and welcome back to another episode of Gatekeepers. I see we've got a whole bunch of cool people hanging out in the chat tonight. Space Tuber Kima, I believe I've seen you before, but if not, and this is your first time, welcome to what is bound to be a very, very strange episode. To my left or right, depending on your perspective, the one, the only Jade from Jade's Tabletop Tavern. How you doing tonight?
Doing well, sir.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Hopefully, we'll have a couple other guests in tonight. I'm not sure what the big guy's doing, but hopefully he will finish up what he's doing and be able to join us. Bruce and Baron and Kai, you guys are always welcome. And if Jade sees any of you trying to squirrel in here, let me know. If I should post the link, I can do that happily. So tonight we're going to talk about the most awkward of awkward topics for role-playing game situations, and that's romance. Now,
Most of you guys,
right? Most of you guys were listening into the chat earlier, and for the most part, it seems to get a really, really bad rap. I myself have never experienced even one of those situations, except when I had players in the group wanting a real romance outside the gaming situation, and there's really that's topic for some other show because I don't really want to get into that. That's so variable and so weird and awkward. I don't even know where to start with that one. It's every table is different, and depending on who's in your group and at your table, friends, family, complete strangers, that can all go a million different ways. So Jade, is there anything you want to pop in before we get started? Anything you want to bring up or mention?
Yeah, so I mentioned this in text form in the chat about half an hour before the show started. So this actually comes from one of our viewers, Scott the GM, or Scott Clark as he is on YouTube. And he asked during one of our live streams, specifically the What is Winning live stream, he asked about romance to see if we'd ever covered it before. So thank you, Scott Clark, for the suggestion. Yeah, here it is. What is, how do we implement romance into a game? And without making it weird. So yeah, this is going to be a unique topic, I would say. I don't think we're going to be covering any like game mechanics, or at least there couldn't be game mechanics to this, because
if you honestly have to roll any sort of physical skill roll, the game has clearly gone off the rails.
Okay, so I know for a fact that for D&D 3.0, 3.5, someone, I can't remember who published it, but someone put out a book specifically dealing with the more erotic fantasies of gameplay. And they had game rules and mechanics and whatnot. And it was a lot of people got the book because, well, they were young teenagers and really wanted to look at all the pictures. But that was more lust than romance, and there's a huge difference between the two.
Thanks, Rick.
So yeah, let's dive in, shall we?
You'll kick that Genghis cough in the ass and kick it out your door as soon as humanly possible. We're all praying for you, buddy. Yeah, let's go with question number one. I can already see we've got some some class acts in the house, and I'm looking forward to all of your opinions. We've also got 9 eyeballs hanging out with us. Not sure whose they are, but welcome to the show. So the first question is, do you allow for any reasonable amount of romance between your players and NPCs and any other players? And if not, why?
So I think it depends mostly on the tone of the campaign. And for example, if I'm running a Wrath of the Righteous game, I'm probably not going to hit on romances much, only because it is literally you are attempting to beat back a demon army. Now, that's not to say that there's no room for romance, but I'm not going to highlight it as I would during something like domain play or extended campaign play. If I'm running a module set, that the module set's not going to have anything in there for romance. They might put in a few things here and there. I know there was a romantic option made for one of the characters as a background trait, but again, that's game mechanics getting in the way of what should just develop naturally. I will allow for romance at my game, especially between PCs and NPCs. If it's something that just is natural, that is designed to develop that player's ability to actually role play. Instead of like rolling dice constantly and just caring about mechanics, if the players are interested in actual role play, then yeah, I think it is something that should probably be included.
I really like this comment James L. just posted. I think people might do well to read up on the concept of courtly love. A lady's favor is a questing item for any aspiring knight. Absolutely, especially for the gaming groups that don't have problems with knights and paladins and that sort of thing, which seems to be pretty common these days. Again, another topic for another night. But in so many stories, the attempted winning of the affection of a princess or a maiden or something like that has been the entire basis for so many of the classics, from King Arthur on up, even prior to that, obviously. It just seems to me like an absolute no-brainer why you wouldn't want to put that in, especially like Bo knows, I made a character for his GURPS game, and the breakup between my character and his former girlfriend was the sole reason for him to join the Federated Armed Forces, to get away from his home world, to get typical teenager breakup stuff. Oh, I'm leaving this 2-horse town, getting away from her, getting as far away from her as possible. Bo can use that however he wants. I can only imagine, bumping into, the guy she left me for kind of thing to come back and bite me in the ass. But that's what good role playing is all about. The movie or the book I should say the movie because the book was different, but the movie Starship Troopers, which is something he's greatly inspired by for this particular campaign. I figured it's only fitting to put some of that in because, after you join up, there's going to be no romance, for a good long time, in the service, although that shower scene from Starship Troopers may beg to differ. I can't even imagine the outtake reel from that. But you get my point. There's so many opportunities to make this, more than just the stereotypical lusty bard after every barmaid in every tavern the party goes into. Even Gimli's, affection for Galadriel in the Lord of the Rings, what was charming and not, creepy in any way. Everybody knew it wasn't going to happen, but they both realized, something was going on. And while it may not have been reciprocated, she was at least a lady about it. And, it was just something that, you can add into your game and move on. And if you want to use it as continual motivation, whether you're a player or a GM, let's work this out tonight and see if we can't, make it less weird for everybody out there. Because, a lot of people are going to watch this, not just tonight, but later on down the road, decades from now, someone may look it up and they're going to go, oh, here's the only video on it that tries to address the situation. And like the title says, spelling orders, not included. Let's see what we can do to make this, a thing, but not a huge thing, but not a weird, icky thing where people go running to Reddit to talk all about it for the next week.
Right. Now, Bo made a point here, reaction rolls to seduce the NPC. And I honestly believe that there should be a distinction between seduction and romance. They are two distinct and separate things entirely. Now, I don't know if you agree or disagree with me on that, Shadow, but if you are attempting to seduce an NPC or another character, you're in it, I believe, for the wrong reasons, because seduction is only self-serving. It's never actually other-serving. And I think that's the huge distinction, is romance serves not you, but the other. It serves them more so than you. And in that, I mean, you are willing to go do things for the other person, the other character. Whereas seduction is what a bard does. That is the tropey bard, is the seducer. The I want it for me, not for them.
And I want it now.
Yeah, and romance is more about what can I do for them. Like, that is the biggest distinction between the two. So if you're role playing a character and not just simply rolling dice for a character, if you're actually role playing the character, that's something to keep in mind as a player, or even as a game master role playing the NPC, is what does the character want and what is the character willing to do for the other? If you can figure out those two things, you can actually develop a romance, a story there between the characters, and your players will take a larger interest in the world as well as that character. They will go out of their way to do things for that character. And that will lead to amazing role play. It really will.
Mm-hmm. And, excuse me, the obvious rewards, behind the scenes, that go along with that, even if they don't end up getting married, kind of thing. There's so much to be said for building one's character reputation. Let's say that you've done all these things for no tangible monetary physical reward other than just your own good standing within the kingdom or something like that. And so few players, ever put that into their character, makeup. So many players are only after it for, treasure, money, magic items, later on, obviously land and title and things like that. But, how your character actually appears to the common folk or, the multitudes around you, that's a big deal if you think about how we as actual real people behave in the real world. We don't always, look for, well, maybe you do, I don't know, for the, what's in it for me kind of thing. Those people are quickly called out, for being exactly like that. And, that's okay with certain players and mindsets, but not every character type would really be like that. They would really look around and see, people for what they are as people, not as a couple of stats written on an index card and move on to the next one. What can I get from them?
And I've actually had several players at my table have romances with NPCs, and I've also had several of my characters at other tables have romances with NPCs. And it wasn't really weird either. Like that, everyone's like, oh, romance is weird. Love is just really, really weird. at the table, and because there's a bunch of dudes hanging out. And you're right, it is a little weird. But if you take a step back and observe it from a larger or a further away perspective, the characters themselves would have interactions with these NPCs. Now, I'm not saying you have to go full dive into the drama club dropout nonsense. You don't have to go that deep. But if you think of your characters as, well, individual people, not just numbers and letters on a piece of paper, I think it's going to add a new dynamic to your game and to your level of play. And if everyone at the table can get into that and really, put themselves, their mind, their essence, so to say, into the shoes of the characters they've created, I think you will have a different experience than just rolling polyhedrals.
Right, because this is, supposed to be a role-playing game. I know a lot of people have different opinions on what is and isn't a role-playing game. Let's assume that you are trying to actually play a role-playing game, not an adventure game, not a miniature, board game or anything like that, but you're playing the part of a character. That character, that's one of the reasons why some people put so much stock into what actors have to go through to play their part. They have to, depending on the style of acting that they prescribe to, they have to do some work to get into the mindset and, what's my motivation, all that behind playing a good character. If we're going to play a good character and we want to be in a good role-playing situation, I think it behooves us to try to, think of all the different dimensions a character is going to have, all the different layers. It's more than just, everybody's the action hero. I've seen you multiple times play characters that are, not that. You know what I mean? That's one of the things I like about gaming with you is you don't always go for the stereotypical, I'm getting head billing as the star of the show. I'm the, the big burly, action hero. You can steal the show without having to play that part. You can do so many other things, and being a bit of a romantic or actually caring about other characters in the story as if they're real, as if they aren't just numbers on a card. It brings so much more to the overall experience, especially when the ultimate reward for most of us with role-playing games is years down the road. When we're talking about the game, when we're remembering what a great game it was, I say this all the time, it's only certain people that are only remembering the die rolls. I got a 20 or whatever. That's cool, for certain kinds of gamers that are really into all that. But when you try to talk about the game to someone who's never rolled a 20-sided die or played a role-playing game or only heard about it, and you are thinking, hey, maybe this person might like to join our next game if I tell them a good story from a great game that I was in, to give them an idea what a great game can consist of. You're not going to tell them about all the cool dice you get to roll and all that. You're going to tell them about the story, about what happened, the good stuff, the bad stuff, and each person, if you were to try to give, your elevator pitch to, 100 different people, you're not going to give the same pitch. And if you do, then you're not really paying attention to who you're talking to, because you can, in the blink of an eye, most people can get a kind of a cursory idea of what they'd like to hear in that elevator pitch, not just, oh yeah, we get to use these cool dice and miniatures, and you're probably going to talk about the cool things that can happen in a great role-playing game. Okay, Hungar, you take care, buddy.
Rest up,
As
dude.
you can see, everybody here is just massive amounts of good thoughts, love, and well wishes for our buddy Hungar. Hopefully, I'll get to hang out with him Friday if he's feeling better. But if not, Hungar, just rest. Do all the things you're supposed to do. Avoid the things you're not supposed to do, and know that each and every one of us has got you in our prayers every night, especially little guy and myself every day. First thing in the morning, little guy asks me, how you doing? And you know, um, one of these days I'll get to tell him, you know, he's great, he's cured, he's coming back in full strength, and we'll be seeing him a whole lot more. Until then, buddy, get some rest, and we'll see you tomorrow, or maybe tonight. Who knows? So, how about we move on to the next question?
Yeah.
And I think this one we kind of touched on the answer, but let's just get it out of the way. Why do you think most GMs flat out refuse to allow for any amount of romance in their tabletop role playing games?
So the number one reason why, as a younger GM, I flat out refused to cover it is I didn't understand romance as a young person. Like, I understood chivalry, I understood the certain codes and certain ethics that would lead to romance, but I didn't fully understand it as a young person. And if a lot of game masters were like me in that aspect, it makes them feel awkward, especially if they're in a basement. I'm going to use the words of the WotC director. A bunch of dudes hanging out in a basement. Well, yeah, it's going to be weird, and at that point, we're kind of filling the stereotype that everyone wanted to label with us. Especially back then, everybody thought we were weird. Everybody thought we were gay or whatever other, derogatory term they wanted to slap on us because we played role-playing games. Yeah. And I think it's weird, for younger players and younger game masters, because they don't necessarily fully understand the concepts and the maturity level required for romance, one. And two, they don't know how to interact with each other and still keep their like themselves separated from the character. But you also have the third concept is a lot of young players, and don't take this with a grain of salt. A lot of young players I have dealt with are this way. They are more interested in reducing the enemy's numbers faster than the enemy can reduce theirs. They're all in it for the numbers. They're in it for the big power plays. They're power gamers. They're aiming to break the game in some way to their advantage. And I'm not going to say that that's a bad, or that you can't play that way. Obviously, people can play that way. But I used to be that way. And I look back on my days when I used to be that power gamer, that person who had to have the highest numbers at the table. And I'm like, you were stupid. I talk to myself. I'm like, no, you were stupid. Why did you do that? Why didn't you take the lessons from that guy who was actually there to role play instead of rolling dice? I was too concerned about the numbers game for a very long time, so I didn't pay attention to romance. Now that I'm in, an older, more experienced player and game master, I'm like, yeah, I was wrong. I will fully admit I was one of those power gaming, McMurder hobos who are just like, I'm in it for the numbers. And I'm like, no, I'm wrong. Don't do what I did. Become the character, becoming more than just numbers and letters on the page. You will have a much different experience.
I totally agree. I wonder. I don't want to be mean about this, but do you find that maybe part of the problem is that the DMs or the players, lack of actual experience in the romance department in the real life is part of the equation? That people who've had nothing but awful experiences, tend to ruin that for others, or like I said earlier, just disallow it. And those that have had healthy relationships or are in healthy relationships tend to have a better outlook on that.
I think the answer to that is maybe. Keep in mind, a lot of that experience was 20 years ago. So we were all really young and didn't know what we were doing, especially with role playing and actually getting into character. So us not understanding romance also stemmed from, just hitting puberty at that point, because that was when I was like 12, 13 years old. We weren't concerned about romance or anything like that. We were more focused on feeling powerful because for something in our life prevented us from feeling powerful. And so we turned to gaming to feel, well, epically powerful. It's the one area where we could feel like we were superhuman, like we were something other than us. And I think that's why we didn't focus on romance as younger individuals, is because we were too busy trying to feel powerful and trying to feel as part of something rather than being considered outcasts constantly. I don't know, your experience or, the viewers' experiences may differ in that. I was never a popular person. So I mentally, when I was a young person, I never thought about marriage because I didn't think it was ever going to happen, because I was that much of an outcast in my regular day-to-day life that I just why would I concern myself with this? It's never going to happen. That was how I actually thought 20 years ago. But now I've been married for 10 years. So.
And, I'm going to assume from everything I've heard that it's a, wonderful relationship. And do you think that's maybe had an effect?
Yes.
When you
I would say
about
yes.
it now?
Definitely. Like I said, we're celebrating our 10th year of marriage this week, actually. And I would say, yes, it has had a profound difference on my perspective of romance and gaming as well, because now I can kind of look at my characters and look at my NPCs as well when I'm game mastering, and I can be like, oh, okay, so having my 10 years of experience with marriage, I can have this character relate in some way some of those feelings, and I can kind of give that to some players who may have never had that experience and may actually wanting to be exploring how to role play rather than just roll dice. Fifth, 10 and high. That's a good one, James.
I don't get the reference. Is that from Back to the Future?
That is from Back to the Future. Okay. But I went to a school that was 3 townships in one, and it was all farm town communities. So people who were like me, who played tabletop games, were not accepted on a regular basis in my hometown. We were definitely the social outcasts of society. It was rather unfortunate, but hey, experience makes you who you are, good or bad.
I was just gonna say, glad you're remembering that, because I wouldn't change anybody I know for anything, because I know how time travel works, and despite my son's arguments with me to the contrary all the time, I wouldn't do a single thing. I wouldn't change a single grain of sand, because I'm sure somehow he would, come out completely different, and I wouldn't risk that.
There are a few grains of sand that I would move or nudge different directions than they went. I will say that. There are a few grains of sand I would move if I had time travel. Anyway,
one of these days when you have a kid, that you would literally, do anything to prevent any one of those little microscopic particles from interfering with that process.
But, yeah. Anyway.
Now that I'm old,
what about
smelly, you? I've seen it. I've seen it all too often, especially this last year, playing with people. Nobody in particular, because I'm not like that. But I've just noticed that I'm associating with a higher level of gamers and GMs on the whole, and most of my experiences were with a set group of players for a good long time, with a couple other groups here and there throughout the last decades, and none of them, with one exception, a guy I really miss, were ever GMs. So they never had to worry about all the different aspects and levels of this hobby. They just, they came to the table and they played, and we hung out, other times, doing other things. So it was, the the complexity level, while it was pretty hardcore for the game I was in with them, after that long, that's inevitable. The multiple layers just weren't the same as when I'm hanging out with you guys, here on Table Breakers or Gatekeepers, or in the chat, or one-on-one elsewhere. The devotion to the hobby is greater here, and therefore the experience is on another level. And one thing I've noticed is a lot of people like yourself and a few others, they're actually married to fellow gamers, and that makes a huge difference. I know a lot of people whose spouses cannot stand the hobby, wish they would do something else, don't understand it, and or they're barely together, or they're single and have had horrible relationships, and all those little factors can add toward this particular topic, I feel. And so that's why I'm hoping we can kind of iron this out, make it better for anybody who's interested. Arnman says he doesn't allow it, he doesn't allow PvP or stealing from the party. Those are all great rules to have at the table, with the exception of the romance. If you've got a guy and a girl, if they're boyfriend and girlfriend and they want to hook up in the game, I don't see any problem with that. As long as they're in it for the long haul, and look like they're going to be, a long-term thing. Because I've had girlfriends or friends of friends, girlfriends join a game only to do some stuff and then leave. And then you've got this dumb gap in the story that you have to explain. You're trying to keep it open in case they change their mind, or, things like that. And, there's a lot of different ways this can get weird, not just, with the bard and the barmaid. That's like the beginning level of where it gets weird. Then you get into the real weird stuff, with
Fade to black.
the out of game. Yeah. Well, no, I wasn't even talking about that. I'm just talking about like what I was just saying, with people breaking up outside the game. Now suddenly their player characters are mad at each other, or they're not there, or things like that. But for tonight, we're just going to stick with in the game. And with that, I'm going to go on to question number 3, which is, are we really okay without even the slightest amount of romance in our tabletop role-playing games? Are we doomed to becoming all the things we have been accused of over the decades? A little harsh, I know, but I don't know how else to put it without including words like incels and things like that. One of my biggest problems with the Lord of the Rings was there was so very out of, 1,500, 2,000 pages, and the actual romance part was relegated to, for the most part, after the story was over, with Aragorn and Arwen. Whereas stories like John Carter of Mars, some other books, Conan, things like that, it's right there all the time. Conan or Grey Mouser and Fafhrd, they're always, having, this sort of thing. Elric had, I think, 2 or 3 different wives throughout the story, and it wasn't even a very long story. It was like 10 years worth of, let's put a, game time, from the first book to the end of the last book, it was maybe 10 years, maybe not even that much. But yet, for a skinny albino, who had to take drugs just to be able to do things, insert your own joke there, he managed to do pretty well, as a carousing young elf, or whatever you want to look at it. I always pictured him as an elf. They drew him with pointy ears. I'm going to go with he was an elf. They were just a bunch of evil elves, whatever. But so are we really, for the most part, all okay with it just not being an aspect, or just, it's never going to happen. No one's ever going to get married. Everybody's just going to just plow through the monsters and then retire, and, the end.
So I would say that no, I don't want to live or run a game that doesn't have any chance for romance at all. Like, to me, that's not really role playing. That's dungeon delving. It's kick in door, loot, or kill all things, loot room next door. So I mean, I guess it really depends on the kind of game that you're running. If you're running a game that is just kick in door, kill all things, loot room next door, then romance really has no place in that kind of game. But if you're, it also, it does depend on the maturity level as well. If it's a bunch of young people, I would say no. Like, I don't think young people really need to delve that deeply into it, especially if they're going to feel uncomfortable or weird about it. Play without it for a while. Wait till you are mature enough to handle it. But there has to be a maturity level to it.
So go out and get a girlfriend first, then come back.
Yeah, sure. I mean, why not? Like, go experience what romance actually is. Go learn, through actual real life experience what romance is, and then come back to the game. And you'll have a better idea of the things to do and not do. And we touched on it earlier. Like, if a player thinks romance is just seducing every thing that moves, well, that's not romance. That's very self-serving and seduction. It's not romance at all. But if they're actually interested in developing, relations with a character, it's going to take on a different feel and tone for not just the player, but for the game as a whole. Now, granted, some players are going to be like, oh, God, here we go again type nonsense. And, for those players, maybe it needs to happen off screen. Maybe it needs to, happen behind the scenes, with conversations between you and the GM over text or whatnot, like things your character would be doing to garner the affection of an NPC or whatnot. So it really depends on your group, the kind of game you're playing, as well as the the maturity level of everyone. And then I don't mean just the one player who's looking for romance, but every player at the table.
Right. It stands to reason that at some point, I mean, imagine you're playing a game where 10 years are going to go by. To think that you go that long and never bump into somebody and never start a relationship or any of that just seems just awful,
unreasonable. Yeah, seems lonely.
I really like what Laura here says. You can have romance, but you have to keep it classy. Absolutely, that is part of what we're doing. However, Scott, there's certain obvious things that should be off camera, but the initial meeting, the initial conversation, and if you can't really get into the conversation because it's difficult for you, you can still third person it and keep it on camera, so to speak, until there is that point where it has to go off camera. As soon as that door closes, if you know what I mean, then that's it. You know what I mean? Or the kiss gets too intense or whatever, fade to black. It's as simple as that. But everything up to that, some of my favorite parts of stories, there was Carson of Venus by Edgar Rice Burroughs, was absolutely epic. Not because of all of the adventure and the aliens and all this stuff, is when at the very last page, mind you, it's a 4-book series, the girl confesses her love to the guy that he's trying real hard to prove himself, and she is just putting up a wall, just and the whole time we find out she was faking it, because she couldn't admit to it because of social situations. But they're on the last page. Sorry, spoiler alert. For a almost 100-year-old book. She says, she loves him, and then you're at the end of the book, and I'm like, holy crap, where'd I put book 2? You know what I mean? I want to read the very next page, but that was classy writing, classy storytelling, and there's no reason why people like us in the chat and out there in TV land can't aspire to that same sort of level of greatness. Mind you, when Burroughs wrote that book, he was far from being considered great. He was just one of many writers at a time writing about things that were, kind of brand new, science fiction, early 1900s. And he still managed to put things in the story that anybody could pick up and appreciate and get to that last page and go, well, crap, I'm hooked. I need the next book, that didn't come out for like years. So you imagine that, so we can, like I said, if we have to do third person, you not knowing exactly the right, clever, charming words to say, that's cool. You shouldn't even need any die rolls. The DM might make that one roll, and that's about all he really needs. Some sort of reaction roll behind the screen, and depending on the die roll, will allow him or her as the GM to go, not interested, slightly interested, very interested, something in between. And, just describe it without, either of them having to, tell each other they love each other at the gaming table and having all the dudes bust up laughing and giving each other crap for the rest of their lives. You don't have to do that. But at the same time, imagine if that did happen and you could all, still, give each other, a little ribbing every now and then, but it's still, come off as a positive for everybody. You know what I mean? I wouldn't mind having, that have happened in certain situations when I was role playing, not between two players unless they were, actively dating. But you get my point where, it could be something, a fond memory that doesn't have to be embarrassing or friendship ending or just weird. You can't hang out with each other anymore because that one time, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, and like I've even gone so far. So I've had this covers from last week actually, the hirelings one. I've had cohorts who were in love with other player characters, and I've had to role play those cohorts or followers who are in love or supposed to be in love with other player characters. Yes, it was weird, and especially because it was, I believe, the player's first time actually role playing a game. But I was trying to teach at the time how to role play rather than just roll dice. So I was trying to draw out interactions with that player to get them to actually role play. So, and yes, again, it was very weird, especially for them. They didn't feel very comfortable with it, and so I backed off. I handed the character over to the game master and kind of let him take the lead from there. But I've also had as a player in a game, I've had two of my characters get married in two different games. One was not for love, it was for power, or it was for perceived power anyway. It was more contractual and was it arranged marriage for domain play.
Sure.
And then the other one was not, well, it was for power, but it was not for power, if you get my drift. The character had become infatuated with another character. Actually, that character had become infatuated with my character, that NPC. And it just kept snowballing, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and more tied into not just the campaign, but to my character's backstory. So my character was willing to go do things for the sake of an NPC, even though it might have been to the detriment of the party as a whole, because that's how invested my character was in that NPC. So when that NPC got kidnapped or went missing, my character was willing to burn the whole world down to find her. Like, that's how far, and I role played that character like that. Like, oh, you took something, you took someone from me. I am going to take everything from you. I'm going to take your ability to walk. I'm going to take your ability to speak and feed yourself. You will be an invalid. You will wish I killed you instead of taking everything from you. Like, that's how far my character went. Kinda, yeah. He was very much, well, okay, he was already a shadowy dealer of death in a way. He never actually killed anyone. He always put them in a position to be killed easily. So he wasn't quite an assassin. But so my character had connections that he had abilities that allowed him to get into places and really wreck their their lives, like their entire lives, if they screwed with him the wrong way. And when the game master, and I'm just going to say it, Scott Clark in the chat here was my game master for that game. When he took my character's love interest as a game, as a way to move the story along, like my character was going to stop at nothing. And I was quite honest, literally nothing to get her back. He would have leveled entire kingdoms if that's what it took. And he didn't care about the consequences for the people. So, and that was that right there was one of the best role play experiences I have had as a player. Because it kind of woke something up inside me saying, this is role play. Like me being into this character, that is role play. It's not the dice. It's not the numbers. It's not, the numbers and whatnot on the page, on the sheet in front of me. It's playing the character and knowing what they want and what they are willing to do to acquire what they want.
I have to admit, agree with Scott. It sounds like the ideal role-playing game session, because that's what it's all about. The treasure and things like that. Think of what you would give up in real life to fix things, to bring someone back, into your life, or back to life, or whatever. For those of you who've lost, or fear loss, or things like that, all that other stuff, all that power, there's nothing more powerful than a connection between two human beings, or two elves, or whatever, two people. That you will move heaven and earth, and you will die 1,000 deaths worrying about the slightest little harm coming to someone that you truly care about. You'd gladly give up your holy sword, or your staff of the magi, or whatever. None of that stuff holds more power over you, is more meaningful and more important than human interaction. Now I want to go back, because there were a bunch of great comments, and I don't want people to feel like we're just moving on without them. God, where was I? Keep it classy. Okay, starting with Laura. Yes, we've all seen it go super wrong. And that's what we're trying to help out with tonight, because Jade's perfect example versus the trillions of awful examples on Reddit and elsewhere out there in the interwebs are what we're trying to avoid tonight. If we can help in some small way later on down the road, I'm going to call that a win. Squirrel, this is another part of what I'm trying to get at, as you'll see as the questions move on. You cannot have good generation play or domain play without bringing this into play at some part, or it's all for naught. If you want to build a kingdom, you're not building it for yourself. You're building it, well, you may be, but you see where I'm going. You're probably building this for your children or your grandchildren, or so that your name will live on in, whatever, infamy or what have you, as being that great and wonderful leader who sired all these great and wonderful leaders generation after generation. Otherwise, domain play is a one-time shot. You get there, and then you get a knife in the back, the end. And there's nothing wrong with seduction as opposed to romance, but there are consequences for everything. Absolutely. That's one of the things I find, that with roll, as in dice rolling, there are no consequences, because there's no further thought. Once the monster is slain, your problems are over. He didn't have any family or friends willing to or wishing revenge or any of that, because it's just an adventure game. There is no further thought to the situation. You kicked down the door, you cleared the room, the end. Right, Bo. And most of us, prefer the longer, campaigns. But even in, like a Shauner-esque one shot, if he, for example, he had, 2 guys and 2 girls at the table, and there was no sort of, hint of romance, it wouldn't really make for a good movie. And I know that's what he he really strives to do is to make a 2-4 hour sort of session that would look great on the big screen. And we all know that every audience is going to have a lot of different people with a lot of different desires when they go to see a movie. And if you think there aren't 50% of those audience viewers, somewhat invested in the romance that develops, you're probably not going to have a really, big selling movie or adventure story or whatever. And yes, Bo, romance should require real character development. That's the whole point. If you think of the people who've never been in a romance, because there are people out there that have never really had one or had one and it destroyed them. There's nothing more developmental in one's life than that. Otherwise you're living, in a vacuum all by yourself, and very little matters except your next meal and your own personal safety. But when you put someone else's well-being above your own, that's when you as a person, I think, begin to develop and become the best you can be. I know from personal experiences, there have been times where the best I was because of somebody else and my desire to be a better person because of that other person's opinion of little old me. Sorry, I was reading this wrong. At Bo Paints Minis, oh yeah, my games are very long, epic tales. One of these days, maybe Scott, you'll invite me to the table. I'll look forward to it. I'm like booked solid right now, but one of these days, who knows? Or maybe you'll get to join one of my games, and we can learn from each other. And I agree on the role-playing aspects of romance, but a lot of the action is applied. Yeah, absolutely. There is no way on God's green earth I am going to do some of the things and make some of the roles, or players were required to make some of the roles I made as a horny young teenager. Never going to happen again. And thank God those people don't know where I am here right now, or they'd be in the chat giving me a hard time, because we've all probably done some stuff in games that we're not too proud of. Heinlein is another great source of romance in a good science fiction story. Like always, go out there and read some books. Get inspired by the greats that inspired the greats that inspired the people who made the role-playing games. Try to go as far back to the source as you can. Shauner says, the one way I handle romance stuff is how they do it in movies. I had seen this, that's why I went back. I would love to see that. Shauner, if there are any, examples of your games out there, I would pay good money to see some of those. Just like I would pay good money to see the game that Jade was just talking about, and other people I know. I've only been hanging out with you guys for a little bit less than a year, so I'm kind of new to the whole internet thing. I was doing other things, gaming, but just not online. And I would love to see some of you guys in action, especially like when Shauna brought up those old videos of DM James, looking back, how he used to be. Classic stuff. And Laura, yeah, I was trying to say this, but I didn't know quite how to put it. She says, I try to remind people to pretend they are in a 1950s, 60s TV censors and keep it classy, especially after we had a DM and player, boyfriend and girlfriend go full TMI at the table with, I'm not even going to finish that sentence. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Laura. I was really hoping it wasn't going to get weird, but ding, 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 you you get the prize tonight. But it's okay, because you probably, can get away with that better than I could. Yes, that was a cool campaign. Another player had an NPC relationship. Exactly. The world is full of people doing what the birds and the bees do, and to just sterilize your entire gaming mentality of that. Nobody gets together ever. They just osmosis separate, and that's how you get other NPCs. It's just, come on. I want to role play. I want to get into the story as if I was really there, and nothing brings it down more than those kinds of you're boxed in, and this sort of thing is just not allowed. Give everybody a chance, to screw up before you assume they're going to screw up. I always say that's the way to do it, Scott Clark. You're welcome. The first Star Trek episode had a romance going on of a sort. In fact, a lot of the episodes did. So I just did romance the same way. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we never even really saw like a bed. You know what I mean? None of that. You have to keep one leg on the floor because it didn't even go
implied.
that far. Right. But that's all you had to do is fade to black. And maybe
Yep.
maybe that's all you. I mean, obviously that's all you need. But we don't even have to do anything other than use our own imaginations and imagine it the way we want, so to speak. And no one's going to say, well, no, this didn't happen or that didn't happen, because it faded to black, and in the canon in your head it went however you want. We're going to move on because it's the next day, or the rest of the party is still in the tavern while you're doing whatever, and they're just whatever, don't care, don't want to know. Classy. Exactly. That should be the mantra of all of us at the table. Unless you're running something grim, dark, and ugly and dirty, and that's what everybody wants, and fine, cool. But
Man, this
that's not
chat.
tonight. Yeah.
This chat's just
My current
going.
campaign, I know my current campaign has marriage and a kind of other one. The one I am wrapping up, the other one of my characters is pregnant. Okay, see, I mean that's where heirs come from. If you want to do that and you want to continue an even a great campaign into an even greater campaign, because you're going to do the domain play, you can't do it without romance. I mean, you can have the arranged marriages, but you know what? Maybe you still get born from those. And you know what? From what I have read about arranged marriages, sometimes those turned into some of the most epic romances of all time. Thank you, Shauner, for reminding us of the famous Conan scene. Right. Because sometimes actions have consequences. And if you didn't think for 1 second walking up to that hut that those were going to be the consequences, you were a big dumb barbarian.
Yes,
Oh,
I
Jay,
remember that.
when Donald's character decided to seduce the girl at the end, only to find out her dad was an ancient gold dragon? Yikes. Hail, Charlotte. Welcome to the
It
show.
ended
I
about
hope
as
you
well as you
will
might think.
Yeah, if you haven't watched the whole show, there's a whole hour behind us that was quite enlightening, I think, and very healthy. And if you want to, go back, just don't watch this at double, triple speed, because I can't imagine how I sound. Oh, I remember. That was great. Hey, Charlotte.
Yep.
All romance is the opposite of PvP. It's not hard. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could look at it as the opposite of PvP. But it doesn't even have to be player and player. It could be player. Well, I mean, player and game master is player and player. But I mean, like there's no like, you don't do dice rolling. You just do social interaction.
Well, I think for the GM's part, it would be good to roll the equivalent of a reaction roll, because we all do that in real life, believe it or not. I especially know women do this. Don't deny it, ladies. I know you do this. Within the first couple of seconds of meeting a guy, yes or no. And you know what the question is, but yes or no. You instantly know that's the equivalent to a reaction check, and you can just go from there. And usually that roll never changes. There's almost nothing you can do to change that initial first impression, right? Right?
First impressions
yes,
are hard to change. Yeah.
And absolutely, the social contract, the session zero, call it a 4-letter word if you like. If you, I mean, you wouldn't invite somebody to a party without, giving them a little bit of a description, would you? Because I've been to parties without that, and boy, was I in for a shock when I got there. You got to tell somebody a little bit about the kind of party, who's there, what to expect. Should I bring some beer? What's not allowed, what's allowed. It's the same freaking thing. We should have more, adult conversations before we go in and play a goofy game of role playing. It's not that hard to ask. I mean, it's not that much to ask.
We're gonna have to get back onto our questions here. We're gonna spend all night on
Yeah,
chat.
I'm gonna stop here, Charlotte, with what's kept me from bringing romance into D&D is probably that I'd be playing the love interest. That's totally fair, but at the same time, it's kind of 50-50. We're all on that same sort of, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But at some point you're going to want to do it if you're going to want to play a longer campaign. You know what I mean? It's just going to come up. So I believe we were on question number 4. Do you think tabletop role playing's overall story can be believable and filling without some sort of romance, especially if it is to include domain play?
Believable without romance and domain play? No, not at all. Like, if you're gonna be in domain play and you're going to be looking to acquire land and be the ruler of a land, you're gonna need you're gonna need your vassals, but you're also going to be looking to acquire more land. And the best way to do that, especially during like the medieval historical type times, is, well, become someone with title and then marry into additional land and resources. Like, that was the name of the game for the nobility. So if your character went from 0 to hero and became a person with a title, you're going to be looking to acquire the affection of someone that has access to land and resources that would benefit you. So the way you do that is, well, romance. Like, you kind of have to, as a character, put yourself out there and find out what's available, and find out if the land that you want, or the domains that you're looking to expand, have the ability for you to expand through either contractual marriage or through actual role play of romance. Like, if the duke in the neighboring kingdom has a daughter who he can't seem to get married to, a person that they're willing to send their daughter off to, that's where you as a character, you step in and be like, okay, here is what I offer. And then then the character, one thing leads to another. You have to actually develop the relationship, and that's role play. Like, you have to role play it. If you're not going to go domain play, no, you don't have to have romance.
I didn't even think about that. I'm glad you brought that up. The whole marriage to consolidate kingdoms. It didn't even occur to me when I was writing up these questions. That's a great point. And that alone could make for what could be a very interesting, entertaining movie if you think about it. Two kingdoms trying to get together. The hero and the heroine. And all the things that can happen. Them butting heads and hating each other, but being pressured only to find out that they're perfect for each other or whatever. I mean, who doesn't like the sound of a story like that? Especially if you throw in a dragon and some orcs and stuff like that. Sign me up. That was a really good point. And I totally agree. I mean, I know I wrote the questions, and you can obviously see where I'm going with them, because the best long-term campaigns will somehow involve the idea of domain play, even if it's just a tiny little stretch of land, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. If you want to keep that land, why? Why not just move on? Because you want to do what all life forms out there want to do, which is have children and raise a family. I don't know too many people that have never at least wanted that, whether they were successful or not. We don't have much choice in the matter. It's built into our DNA, the wanting to have a family, to leave something behind besides just our works. Leave people behind who will remember us, and then their children and grandchildren, etc. It's just it's just the way it is in the real world. So why wouldn't our fantasy or science fiction or fantasy, whatever, games sort of mirror that? And yes, absolutely, Shauna. From what I hear, a lot more tends to happen in games like that than does at other tables, and that's what I've been so excited about these past 8, 9, 10 months is the difference. I'm guilty of it too. I ran a lot of games where it was nothing but combat, and that's all anybody cared about. The beginning and the end of the episode or the game session, you get that other stuff in, and then suddenly it's a big fight, and then it's almost time for everybody to go home. And I want to see more of the role playing. You know, Mind you, depending on the type of game, the combat can, especially in like superhero games, that tends to be the one time I have to state that those kinds of combats tend to take a lot more time. But um, I definitely just want to see a lot more role playing, before I check out, so to speak. Speaking of checking out the classics, TSR used to borrow from Shakespeare all the time. Yeah, absolutely. That is funny that you bring up Shakespeare because my next question was actually, what are some examples in fantasy and sci-fi literature we can try and emulate in our tabletop role-playing games to make the overall emergent story more lifelike? Because that's what we're trying to accomplish for the most part. Yes, we're talking about trying to make a fantasy more lifelike, but who doesn't? When you're daydreaming, don't you want the most vivid visual images when you're doing that, or dreaming, or fantasizing, or better yet, at the role-playing game table? Let's make it more lifelike. So
Yeah.
for
So I
you,
mean,
Jay.
so like as far as like science fiction literature or just fiction literature, one of my recent authors that I've gotten into is Brandon Sanderson. And there is he does build romance into several of his stories, and it's oftentimes a slow build, and you get to see the characters develop alongside one another in very interesting ways. And I'm like, you know what? That's the way to I want my characters to develop. I want them to develop side by side with these NPCs that there might be a romantic character to get be with, and I want it to develop naturally and slowly so it kind of feels more real. I do want that realism in a game. I do want a certain level of believability in my games, as a player and as a game master. So I am going to look for more romance in the science fiction and other literature material to kind of emulate. Much like horror, romance has never been one of the things I read on a regular basis. I'm more into the fantasy aspects, like, oh, how does that magic work? Or, oh man, that time travel concept, I really want to know more about it. Like, that's been my focus for a very long time, because that's where my mind goes, is like, what are the mechanics of the magic system? What are the mechanics of whatever science thing is happening? More so than just the story and how it develops. So when people, when authors give me well, here's the mechanics of behind the screen that you're looking for, then I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And then I'll go back to the story and read it again or listen to it again, as the case might be. And then I'll pick up on all of the other aspects of it. Like, I've listened to Jim Butcher, I've listened to Sanderson, I've listened to David Webb. I've listened to a lot of authors because, well, I have one of those desk jobs that I can listen to audiobooks and work at the same time. So I've listened to a lot of authors, and I'll listen to their books because I have them 3, 4, 5, sometimes. And as far as the Dresden Files goes, I've listened to the Dresden Files probably 8 times or more, depending on the book. Like, there's some books I just listen to more because they do more for me. But I will emulate other authors that do romance, and I will bring that to a game table as in a lot of the same ways. So I think literature can definitely influence and bring more emergent, lifelike stories to your players and to you as the game master.
Real quick, Shauna, there's no way I'm leaving Yvonne DiCarlo for dead. There's no way Batgirl is dying on my watch. Sorry. Um, as for me personally, you guys probably know Roger Zelazny. You know, he was a good friend of mine and a phenomenal writer. But I'm gonna have to go with, you know, no surprise, Edgar Rice Burroughs. When it comes to, you know, good old fashioned pulpy romance, you know, interaction in a pulp or science fiction or a fantasy story, it doesn't really get any better than that. I've read a lot of his work, and it bummed me out the other day because I was going through a list of everything that he wrote and realizing that there weren't many books left of his that I hadn't read. That being, you know, the worst part about his library. There's just not enough of it. So if you guys want to throw some recommendations, because I'm always looking for new books to read, um, throw in, you know, some recommendations in the comment section. Because if you throw them here in the chat, I won't be able to find them unless you wait till the very end. But I would appreciate any good recommendations. I'll go check out, you know, the notes on the book. Not too far, because that I've done that and ruined my desire to read a book. I'd rather buy a book and then find out it's a crappy book than to read about a book and go, oh, I don't want to read it now because I know I'm not going to like it. Because I did that with some books, but they were in my collection. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to read it. And then decades later, I read it and I'm like, why the hell didn't I read this sooner? So, you know, don't judge a book by its back cover, I guess I would say.
Yeah. As far as suggestions on books, you can actually also drop them in our Discord if you are a member of our Gatekeeper Discord. Or you can, you know, just message them directly on Discord. That would probably work too.
Okay, Laura, we dealt with it. I took over as DM and then consequences happened. We went dark, grim, fast. But then that got everyone rescuing the two and dealing with the fact that they had murdered the town. Learned. Okay, they did law enforcement exits and don't wander into the woods alone. Okay. I'm not exactly sure what all of that meant.
I think I get it.
Okay. There were times when my character wakes up and there's a girl in his bed still sleeping. I don't say who she is or how we met the night before. Stuff is just assumed. Okay, that's kind of, that sounds like, you know, things that can happen in real life. I'm just gonna leave that there. Um,
That might be a
I don't
great way to
drink
start a
anymore.
game.
Yeah, you know what? It really could, or even better yet, a good novel. You know, especially, you know, a detective type story. I could really see, you know, because I would love to see, you know, sort of a pulp resurgence. Razor Fist has done a bunch of great videos on why pulp is the way to go, and I couldn't agree more. You may not, you know, agree with everything he says, but when it comes to certain things, the guy seems to be really on top of it. Then the next DM rotated in to continue the fact that the party was hunted. Oh, okay, I get where you're going now. Whoops. It's just role playing based on events and stats. Sure.
Yeah.
Then they chilled and went classy. You marry the king's daughter for reasons.
So that's getting back to the domain play. Like, you know,
Right.
if your character is the leader of an area, or, you know, wanting to have an heir, yeah, you go marry the king's daughter. get some title.
Exactly, Sean. I was, you know, taking cues from previous conversations. You know, agree on a, you know, a rating for the game. You know, get the, you know, the tone and the setting and the feel for the game before you start. You know, let everybody know what they're getting themselves into. You don't just blindly walk into the movie theater and, you know, randomly pick a, you know, a door to go in and see what you're going to watch. You usually, you see a commercial, or a movie's coming out and you want to see it. You go in, you know what you're kind of getting yourself into, and that's not too much to ask from an RPG.
Yeah.
One of the Catherine Kerr novels, the main character married to gain access to a navy to
Oh,
burn
Navy, yeah.
down pirate. Okay.
That's the way to
Yeah,
do
right.
it.
GPGRX. Isn't M missing from that somewhere, or is that? I don't know. I don't go to the movies anymore.
M is for video games.
Oh, okay. Domain place
Yeah.
sounds like something you'd read about on sketchy parts of Craigslist. Thanks, Bo. You get second prize for the Awkward Award tonight. The Cylon chick with the blonde hair. What was her angle? Honestly, I don't know. That chick
I think he's talking about the new Battlestar.
Oh yeah. I watched every single episode of it,
Okay.
and the pilot was amazing, but she was a psycho. That part with the baby carriage, yeah, wow, that just I couldn't get that image out of my head for the rest of the show. To me, movies are one shots, right? Just do cinematic combat, like cinematic romance is done. Right.
Yeah.
It's just with this the whole superpower thing, people tend to get wordy with their descriptions of their super abilities because super. The star-crossed tragedy of a long-lived elf and his love of a human lady. Right.
Lots
Barbarian.
of man, I love the fact that the chat's so active. Like, thank you guys for being so active.
Yeah, this is definitely one for the record books. He was late for his combat test. Edgar Rice Burroughs, women could handle themselves, no shrink. Exactly. Good point. There doesn't have to always, although I'm pretty certain no women wants to have to go rescue their husband type of deal. You know what I'm saying? It's just kind of,
that might depend on that might depend on the person playing that character.
Obviously, if the guy needing rescuing was overwhelmed by 1,000 bad guys, and there was just nothing he could do about it, but the sort of shrinking violent male character, the girls aren't gonna want to rescue him. He's like, screw him, I'm on to someone who doesn't need rescuing. Sorry, just goofing around, but it just doesn't, I just can't see that being that whole it just doesn't seem like it's going to fly very well.
Shauner's asking some pretty good questions as well. Like, these are good, like, campaign or story building questions. For as a game master to be asking himself, as well as putting the idea in the player's head. Can the love interest be trusted? If you kiss her, are you dead the same day? Like, those are all like really great questions that you as a game master can ask. And Shauner is really great at the role play aspect of the game, more so than instead of like just rolling dice. Like, Shauner is all about the role play.
Arnold is lucky he got away with his life.
And I gotta say, Shauner is probably one of the best like role play centric game masters that I have listened to. So if he's asking questions, or putting these questions out there, you might pay attention to him, because they are really great, thought provoking questions.
Yep. And I want to give a special shout out to my good friend R. Keith Andrews. Thank you for showing up in the chat tonight. Sorry I had to bail out of the show earlier today. I have no fear. I'm going to go watch the rest of that one because we were having a really nice conversation. But, on Wednesday nights and Thursday nights, thank God you don't have a show on Thursday nights. I have to, be here with the guys. And if you haven't checked out his show, if you're into, psychic stuff and things like that, definitely check out his channel. I'm going to find a way to put a link to your show like you do for me every day. I just haven't figured out where to put that yet. Babylon 5. Another great example.
I've never actually seen Babylon 5 all the way through.
Well,
I've only seen bits and pieces.
you know what? You're going to hear a lot of crap about season 1 and how you should just skip it. One of these days, when you've got some time and you want to, just do what instead of trying to burn through it, in a couple of weeks or whatever, just take it slow and enjoy it. We had to wait a whole freaking week in between episodes, and then when the season ended and you had to wait, like a year or whatever it took to get back to it. You won't have to do that, but definitely don't try to run through it because it was well worth every episode when you look back on it, yes, season 1's kind of rough, but
well, I mean, season 1 of almost any show can be really rough. It's really dependent upon the directors and the storytellers there. So,
yeah, and of course,
yes, Firefly was awesome.
Those are my 2 absolute favorite sci-fi programs of all time. Not necessarily my favorite shows of all time, but when it comes to sci-fi, and depending on my mood, I'll put one over the other. But to be honest, my life wouldn't have been the same without both of them. Nicely done, nicely done. Keith, personally, I've seen some women that prefer to connect with a weaker, if you will, partner. Yeah, sure. I'm just not, as technologically inclined as I'd like to be, Keith. I rescued hubby in real life. He has come to mind. That's so nice to hear. Because I did have a kind of a badass girlfriend once upon a time, a couple, to be honest. Now that I think about it, one was in the Marine Corps, and one went on to join the Bloods. So yeah, yeah, I know, scary. Yeah, the kind that would literally, enter your room and you not know how they got there, and you wake up and what the hell? Yeah, scary shit. But I wouldn't change a single moment of my life for anything. Crafting Gamer, you know what? I was about to, when we end the show, I was gonna, really shout out your channel. I really want to see you get the numbers you deserve. So everybody, Crafting Gamer is here. Squirrel Hermit is here. Bo Paints Minis is here. 3 of my new favoriteest channels in the whole wide world. Go out there, even right now, if you want to take a break, go out there and sub. We'll still be here when you get back. Just make sure you come back. And of course, R. Keith Andrews. If you're into the the psychic phenomenon and improving your life and theories on doing so, I call him my guru, but I just, that word just has a weird feeling to it. But the guy, he's a lot of fun, and believe it or not, he's a longtime gamer and painter of miniatures. So he's absolutely welcome to the family. I want to get through the chat, but I'm going to have to take a break right here at Justin Thor, who just came in. Babylon 5 didn't get the love it deserved from its own creators, sadly. I know. So question number 7. This is one. There's only
7 or
questions
6
on our list. Oh, did I?
7 or 6.
Oh, you're right.
I think you might have skipped 6.
You're right. Yeah, I did, and I don't want to. If we're entering a domain play situation at our table, how do you handle a character's desire to start a family to ensure themselves an heir to his or her kingdom?
So I think as far as like domain play goes, like if you know you're going into domain play or generational gameplay, like you have to know that ahead of time. Like you as the game master will know that. So your characters should also be thinking about it, and you should remind your characters, hey, this is going to be, domain play. I am, expect to have like domains that you have to take care of and whatnot, or have followers or whatever. And be upfront with them about that. Like, don't tell them all of, don't show them your whole hand, but, be upfront with them about it. And if it's going to be generational play, well, how does it become generational play if there's no romance? Like, how do you make the next generation of characters without romance? Like, there are ways, and I'm sure Connell would enlighten us on that. Bards are probably one of those ways. But that again, that's to me the wrong way to do it. If you're gonna do it, you have to get started soon. You have to do it, at towards the beginning of the game, or maybe even the middle of the game, and start introducing characters to the PCs, to test out the waters of a love interest, to see if they're actually willing to. Thanks, Scott. See if they're willing to bite onto that hook and role play out the romance and get them involved with that. If you've got character or players who just are like, nope, not going to do it, won't do it, don't ask, don't bother, don't push this onto me, then what kind of players and game you're going to have. If you have players who will reciprocate and be like, yeah, you know what, let's explore that rabbit hole. Let's figure out how that goes, and how far and to what extent that goes. And like I said, I've had characters that have gotten married. Granted, they got married either like midway through or at the end of the game, but the balls got started rolling early because that's just how it was presented. Like, I think it was week, I think it was like week 27 or 28 when the character that would become Glass, my character's name was Glass. It was actually a rebuild of a character my buddy Reese built. With my own spin, but the character Glass, his love interest was basically stumbled upon in like week 27 or 28 of the campaign, and they were married by, I think, like this was a 3-year campaign, 3 or almost 4, and they got married, I think, at like week 70, 80 something. I think might have been actually probably even into the 90s or hundreds of weeks. And it wasn't even the end of the campaign yet, because they still had a lot of things to go do, as not just as a couple, but as the game, as the campaign went, because they ended up getting married because, well, reasons. And because the character's the love interest's dad was actually traveling with the party at the time, and well, let's just say I had to make my character had to make an honest woman of the NPC for reasons. I'm just gonna go ahead and fade to black there. But no, it was a great game. It made me a better player than I was before. I will say that. Like, Scott did a really great job at bringing out the better role play than I ever had before. And so when the campaign finally wrapped, I'm getting to the point of the, what do you do to ensure the family heir? When the game wrapped up, he gave us the epilogue of the campaign. And in that epilogue, we got to basically see our characters age and have the kids and have, their stories continue in the epilogue, in the final scenes, before we wrapped up, packed up our dice, and, started gearing up for the next campaign. Granted, I took a break from his table after that campaign. I needed to step back and into my own shoes and, take deeper perspectives on what I was doing in the hobby. So I wasn't in his current game. So that was just one game ago for me with him.
I honestly can't believe our Keith wrote this, but that shows you some of the sense of humor this man has. Justin, yeah, I totally do this, the time jump, to get the character to first level kind of thing. But it's nice to be able to try to squeeze some other stuff in between there, the bonding between father and son, or what have you, just a couple of nice little memories to, sort of, really sail home that point. Obviously everybody should know how to, love their children, but giving some little thing to connect them, with, or maybe try to weave something in, like, a special place that they would go to, just the two of them, just to talk, or, whatever, or, it's just something just to, really try to seal that little connection that should obviously be there, but so that you could maybe weave it into the story later on. Maybe, you know, the first level son that's gone off to go and do stuff, maybe make for, a moment when, the father or the mother could come into the story later on at, like the cavalry arriving, kind of thing. Suddenly, oh, dad's here. We got this, something like that, just maybe sort of, don't just, they're dead, move on, dead, move on. Okay, now you're running the grandkids, like a couple of video games I played that they would do that, and you're just like, you're pretty much running the same character. It just, you're just like re-rolling the character up again at first level and starting it all over again. Try to, put some real, originality into each generation as you play, so that you don't just mix them up, because dad was a fighter, so I'm a fighter, so grandkid's a fighter. Maybe one started out as a paladin, next one went to ranger. Now you got a magic user in the family. Go figure. You know what I mean? Adoption, extended family member, other options besides oopsie, tumble in the straw. You're really trying to get the gold and the bronze tonight, huh, Laura? If a GM has a hot female character, he has plans for, make sure there are other characters she would be a good fit with. Otherwise, the GM will make a boyfriend NPC for her. Sure, you know, it all depends. I mean, a lot of times the
But
PCs are
he
just not going to
well,
go for it. You know what I mean? They're just going to be
he,
like,
he
nope,
goes on.
not doing it, don't care.
He goes on because of character limits on comments. Players don't want to listen to two lovebird NPCs, and he's right.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's just, kind of, the DM showing off. Look what I have that you don't, or however you want to look at my characters. They're better than yours. Yeah, no, nobody wants to see that. Don't do that. It's their show. They're the star. You're just everything else. Remember that. You're not,
Mm-hmm.
it's not all about you as a GM. Otherwise, just write a book. I'll read it, but, don't invite me to the table if that's what you're going to do. Years ago,
Yeah,
I
that's
ran an
next week's
8 year
topic.
solo. Yeah, years ago, I ran an 8 year solo campaign for a friend of mine. That I've done that as well. I'm actually kind of doing that with one player on the side of our regular group, because he has multiple characters, because we've been playing together so long. Nothing wrong with that. Just don't let it get weird. Um, I haven't done 8 years. I think 5. My record still, more than 1 year these days is like, you know,
A godsend.
legendary.
That's what I
Yeah.
call that, a godsend. So,
What woman speaks is this man, and love I know, not these words you speak. Oh, okay. That's from Star Trek.
he's being coy. Yeah.
Yeah. In my games, the players will often wake up and it's the future, and they are married with kids, etc., and have no idea who anyone is. Shawner, I bet you have probably created some of the best one shots of all time. And one of these days, I hope you'll actually like start putting out some adventure idea modules or whatever you want to call it. I seriously, I'd buy them, and I know a lot of other people out here would as well. So, get cracking maybe. I don't know. I know
Yeah.
he's busy, true on the Lovebirds comment. So I'm going to leave it here at the Lovebirds comment while we move into question number 7. If and when you approach the subject of romance at your table, how do you handle it besides just fade to black, as the very first,
Um,
chance?
so I guess my counter question to that is, what purpose does having romance in the game serve? You can if you're going to approach romance and you want it in your game, you first have to understand what the romance is going to do for the game, and not just, you as the GM or them as the player. Like, what additional purpose is it going to serve? Will it produce errors? Will it not? Will it make the player a better player, or will it not? Or are they going to clam up? Are they a young player, a mature player, an experienced or inexperienced player? These are things you have to consider. So I would counter with, what purpose does having romance in the game serve?
Simply, I think it would be either overall story momentum or character growth. Character growth,
Okay.
Because even a failed romance can cause character growth. How many people do you
Absolutely.
know who had one romance that ruined their entire life? Or the opposite, in the old days, there are still couples together today that have been together 50, 60, 70 years, you know what I mean? And which, that's kind of a thing of the past now, but, in the old days, especially in a fantasy game, that could literally be the thing. And that could, add to the character growth and the story momentum, because of all the different things that can, spring from that, besides the obvious, that we talked about, the kidnapping, and, you could have the betrayal if you, feel brave enough to throw that in there, or, even, the murder, if someone's spouse gets, killed, wars have been fought over things like that.
Oh yeah, and that like romance can be an amazing motivator for adventure. Like, not just because of the fear of losing a loved one. That fear should inspire characters to move to action. But it's how do we handle that as game masters without falling into the old tired tropes? Or maybe you want to fall into the old tired tropes of the kidnapped princess, or the secret betrayer. Like, maybe you want to fall into those tropes, but I would rather not fall into those tropes. I would, yes, I'm going to probably use the kidnapped princess or kidnapped loved one thing, but I would like to put a different spin on it. They're not necessarily kidnapped. What if they just went out for a walk and haven't come home yet? Your character is worried sick. They haven't been home for 3 days. Where are they? What are they doing? What do I do? How do I go find them? Like, those are questions that the character should consider, or that the player should be considering, as the character. Be like, okay, the person's been gone 3 days. What the hell's going on, game master? Let's move along that story. Let's explore that. I'm gonna go find them. And maybe they have been taken. Maybe they haven't been taken. Maybe they're just delayed. Maybe the bridge is out between towns and they haven't been able to get a message to you yet. But those things right there show that you as the player are in character, and you have concern for a fictional, non-existent person. That brings out better role play. Like, that is what we're aiming for, is better actual role play. So if your character, would be concerned for their love interest, their romantic interest, role play it. Consider those things. Consider those questions that would nag at you if you had a loved one who you hadn't heard from in 3 days and they're supposed to be home with you. Like, what would you do as a person? But think about that as the character. Like, what are they going to do about it? How are they going to solve that? And dive deep into those characters. Like, ask yourself those questions when you're playing those characters, and game master, do the same. If you've got a player who can't make it one night, but they have a love interest NPC, make that NPC the story hook. Like, have that NPC go to the party, because that NPC is going to know that their love interest pals around with these guys. It's like, hey, I haven't seen so and so for a couple days now. What do you guys know where he's at? Or do you guys know where she's at? Like, whatever the case might be, we need to go find them. They haven't, no message, no nothing. And then the whole party is now involved looking for their NPC or for their player character that their player just couldn't make it that night. And you make it an entire a night session. Huh?
I love that. That whole idea is epic. Not to mention, I was thinking of different ways to do the, not necessarily the kidnapping, but disappearance. What if she's in a cult, and she's got to go off and do cult stuff, or she's a spy and she hates being a spy, or all these different ways you could do different semi-tropey things. Multi-gun. I really hope you can get into a bunch of good games. You've been hanging out with us for a good long time, and from what I gather, like you said, this is really new to you. You have no idea how much we kind of envy that place in your life where you're just getting into it. You're about to create some memories that are going to last you a lifetime that most people won't understand, but they are going to be, I'm sure we all hope that they're going to be, in a word, epic.
Spoiler warning, you are going to have hit and miss games now and then. They just happen.
Enjoy every second of it, because there's,
and to further, yes, they are. And to further the idea of, as what you said, maybe the love interest is a cult member. Like, you can actually go down the rabbit hole with that. And yes, it's a trope, but you can make or use the romantic interest as a primary antagonist to the campaign itself, like to the whole story itself. They could be the leader of this shadowy organization that the players have been working against slowly for however long, but the NPC still, and if I can speak, the NPC still maintains that romance with one of the characters or one of the player characters. And even when the party catches up with the leader of this shadowy organization that they've been fighting against for so long, and they realize, oh hell, it's that NPC that is romantically involved with one of our other party members. Like, force that confrontation, force that emotional and social confrontation with that player and their character, because they're going to have to make a choice, and that's going to not just affect them as a player, but it has to affect them as a character. If it doesn't affect them as a character, they weren't role playing; they were just rolling dice. Make that romantic interest like still in love with that PC, but unrepentant for all the shadowy things they did. They had a purpose and a reason why they were doing that, and the party's been working against them without necessarily knowing what that reason was. So, when they finally find the leader, and it's the love interest, the party has to make a choice, and it's going to be a hard one. It has to be a hard one for the player whose character is the love interest or is romantically involved with that NPC.
Yep. That's given me a whole lot of ideas. This whole show has given me a lot of great ideas for some upcoming games I am going to run, and things I will, put my money where my mouth is, and try and include a lot of tonight, because it's one of the few. There've been a couple of key topics that I've been really bothered with or excited about, or what have you, this last year. This being one of them. Obviously, death to PCs has been another one, and dragon slaying. They're like the three topics that have been huge parts of my games, and you guys have helped me out a lot. Ghostbusters, great, but I don't know that I'd call it the best one ever. And yes, I totally agree, Sean, even though I never really got to watch a lot of Bonanza, but there have been so many other shows where you knew if there was a love interest, she wasn't going to last long, because those shows had like one or two guests budgeted for the show each episode, and that was it. They rarely came back, especially like during the 70s and 80s. Like, oh, she's gonna die, you know. So
They're tropes
that's
for a
where
reason.
reality overflows into fantasy reconsiderations. Absolutely dysfunctional love, like Die Hard movies. I was actually thinking of True Lies. That was another good one. That could, it's the opposite. This time the mysterious character is actually the husband, not the wife. But it can work either way.
I mean,
Especially
yeah, it
in
can go either direction. Mm-hmm.
Anything Die Hard related. Okay. Spoiler: at the end of Groundhog Day, the guy spends the whole day doing things on his own. At the end of the day, the girl has the hots for him. I think she was drinking though. Yeah, you know what, Shauner? That's one of my least favorite movies and one of my most irritating pet peeves. Is the if a TV show replays stuff from a previous episode or the same episode, like Star Trek did, and other shows where it's a recap episode where the show is entirely made up of clips from other episodes. Guaranteed, I'm not going to watch it, or I'm going to throw something at my TV.
Skip.
Yep.
Skip.
I have new players at my table, and it has been awesome. I could only imagine, Multi. I hate movies where divorced couples get back together in the end. Yeah, or the War of the Roses. When I first watched that movie, I literally couldn't help but get into a fight with my at the time girlfriends. Like, why the hell would you ever recommend watching this movie to anyone ever? This is just that's all it's going to do is start a fight with every couple that goes and watches this movie. God, I could only imagine the fights that started on the drive home for everybody who went to see that movie back in the day. I just absolutely freaking hate that crap. There's just no point.
Well, I know we're nearing the end of your questions.
Yeah, let's hurry
so
get to the last one. Oh, you want to go through some of yours? Fair.
Yeah, I mean, some of them might come into play onto your last one as well. So one of my questions now I have been inserting some of my questions here and there or thoughts here and there as we've gone. But this one is definitely for you and for anyone, out in chat to consider deeply. How can you convince your players to interact with these social challenges of romance? And because it's not as simple as kick in door, kill everything, loot room next door. And it's also not as simple as how much wealth the character spends on the NPC to gain their attention. Like, how do you force the interaction if assuming the player is interested?
How do you force?
Or how do you, or not necessarily force, but how do you convince the player to actually role play the romance and actually be involved with it more so than just spending loot on the character, on the NPC?
I would. Wow, that's a good one. I would let them know that one, they don't have to be in first person. They can go. They can flip the third person. We'll get to you here in a second, Connell. And explain to them that just think about it as any other NPC, but with the added benefits that would come from a different kind of interaction with a love interest or a romantic interest, and remind them that that it's okay. You're amongst friends. We're not gonna give you a hard time or any of that stuff that we talked about earlier, and encourage them to just put themselves into their character. Really think about playing this part. If you were auditioning for a TV show or a movie or something like that, you trust me, you wouldn't think twice about it. You know what I mean? Unless you really camera shy or something like that. Just relax, enjoy the situation, and or get through it however you want. This isn't This isn't meant to be anything other than moving the story along so that it makes for a more three-dimensional story, because it's not just, I mean, unless, you're the first one bringing this to the situation and everybody else just wants to, kick indoors and kill monsters.
Been in those games.
Yeah, yeah. If that's your cup of tea, cool. But if you want to be in an actual role-playing game, then, it's no different than interacting with the cop on the beat or the bartender or the shop owner. It's a give and take, back and forth, and just, if it helps, just picture her as, your favorite starlet out there, or star, or someone that you wouldn't mind, being in this kind of a relationship with.
So thinking along those lines, when role playing the romantic interests and whatnot, does fame or infamy affect romantic interactions, and or should it? Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
So when including romance into games, your party's going to either be famous or infamous, as the case might be, and given their level of fame or infamy, should that influence the romantic interactions in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. Reputation goes a long way. That's other than the love at first sight or destiny or something like that. People talk, and you hear things, and any person worth their salt is going to ask questions and find out, or be able to size up a person and to decide whether or not they're interested in pursuing any sort of relationship, or whether it has to be strictly professional. But if it's going to go toward the romantic angle, people are going to do some homework, at least a little, unless they're just meeting at a party and their friends are off talking to someone else, and they see Mr. Right roll up to the scene. Depending on the location, especially in other countries, people are quick to stake their claim and make it pretty obvious that okay, I like the old "I saw her first," kind of thing. They're gonna try to move in, and even if it's not gonna work out, they're gonna try and make a good first impression.
Okay. Now these are more like game mastery, thought-provoking questions. And I don't mean to hijack the show, but
No, you
what
mind if I bring
level of
Connell
deep?
in?
Yeah, let's get Connell in here. 10 minutes to go.
I know he
8
probably
minutes.
doesn't have a whole lot of experience with this, but he did grab the link from the secret squirrel location. So hey, Connell, what's happening? Let's let Jade hit us with the first question, or the next question.
So again, these are game mastery, thought-provoking questions, more so than needing an answer. And the first one of these is, if you're the game master and you're wanting to include romance in the games, what level of detail do you place into your NPCs who are meant to be the romantic interest? And by that, I mean, what considerations do you take in the way of personality traits, likes, dislikes, habits, quirks, the things that make an individual unique and interesting? So that's number one. And again, these don't need answers, but they are thought-provoking questions from my game mastering to other game masters. How do you make the character more real? Number two is, go ahead.
I was just going to answer them as they rolled out.
Yeah, sure.
Just because for the first one, it's pretty quick. Like I always say, know your players. If you know your friend's got a type, start there. He likes blondes, he likes brunettes, start there. He likes redheads, okay. That one thing right there can instantly, especially for guys who like redheads. You guys know, if you say redhead, they're like their head will snap, to face attention, and already you've got their interest, and go from there. Connell?
I agree. It's know your table. If you're not dealing with a bunch of kids and actually dealing anywhere from young adults to adults, as the table may, but if there is a right scenario in the game where it works, Rise of Runelord with being an example where the shopkeeper's daughter picking one of the characters in the first module and starting a relationship with them. How I handle it, especially with a group of people I don't know, I roll like, well, I've got 6 people at the table. I'm going to pick up a d6, and whatever it rolls on, whichever number, that's the way that's the person I'm just going to go hit the trigger with. And it hasn't stopped me with it being a female player or a guy player. I just make the advance and let them take it ever which way they want to.
So for me, I always, I want to make sure my NPCs have a goal, a life goal. I try to make them as real as possible. I give them likes, dislikes, and such. The things I mentioned. Again, these are more thought-provoking questions for game masters. If you want your interactions, especially the romance interactions, to be hard-hitting and really character developing, these are just some things to think about. And the next one I've got is, how do you draw out the creativity of the player when it comes to impressing and keeping the interest of the NPC? So, and in that, I mean, what interactions should you have with your player's character to keep the romance from becoming just a notation or monthly expenditure on a character sheet? Like, what interactions should you be doing with the player?
Colin, you want to take this one first since you just got here?
Well, Scott actually, back when I was in his campaign, and my character fell in love with a daughter of an ancient gold dragon. I'm remembering that one. It was more the fear of God that the father was going to eat me than it was more her feelings, to be honest. But if they got a location, let's say they go out for a hex crawl, but they have to keep coming back to the base. Don't make her go, well, she got kidnapped by a band of bandits or whatever, but make her say, honey, I just got a store open. Is there anything I could sell for you in the party? Make her actually, maybe making her the shop owner or having her have a part in the for the party for the mechanics of the game could help have her be in a one niche, one NPC, having her be not main character, but hey, I got a store going. Bring me your wares. I'll sell them. I'll give you guys back a decent price. Asking for a friend. I just make her a part of the game somehow. Does that answer your question?
For me, it's little signs of favoritism. It's really simple. Whether it's an extra biscuit on their plate, or just little things, are all it takes. Because in the real world, especially in fantasy games, even sci-fi games, any sort of favoritism is instantly perceived as a lot more favoritism than it really is. But that's all it takes, just a little bit of favoritism, and you can build up, like people in the chat were saying earlier. Bo asked, how does the GM introduce romance to each of the players? That, again, is tailor make it for each player. You know what I mean? If they're playing a fighter, she's a magic user. Work with the tropes, the opposite attraction sort of thing. You can go with, fighters and fighters, magic users and magic users, but sometimes that's really not the best, best method. They say opposites attract for a reason, not just because it's usually scientifically true, but it also makes for more of an interesting couple. You know what I mean?
Mm.
That's just what I would do, or I have done in the past. Um,
Again, these are more like GM thought provokers than actual questions. Do you or how do you discourage use of magical enthrallment as means of courtship?
I would usually strike them down with lightning. No, it's a great way to become evil. It's an absolute,
Yes, yes, it is.
the sure sign of you, one, have no confidence, have no game, and why are you at my table kind of thing. And I will usually just humiliate them with what you're not even going to try the normal way. You're just going to force it. That way, when the spell breaks, you're an even bigger douche as opposed to it's just a regular breakup. There's nothing more despicable in if you think of some of the sci-fi stories. Star Trek did a couple of episodes on different ways of that sort of mind rapey sort of thing. They just really just god awful, the most disgusting crimes you could ever really commit, other than the other one which we're not going to talk about. If a player even suggests it, we better already be in an evil campaign, or yeah. Connell?
It goes evil pretty quick.
I'm normally just asked a daft bastard to leave the table. I don't screw around with it. It's like the genie from Aladdin. There's 3 things I won't do. I won't kill anybody. Don't ask me. I don't like whatever. And I won't make anybody fall in love with you. It's like there's a difference between he's like, well, I want to role play it out. That's cool. We could go that way. Well, I got a ring of wishes. No. Miracle. Well, you need one, but no. And he's like, well, door. There's a door right there, because
okay.
I don't, no one needs that bullshit in their game. I mean, all seriousness. I mean, even evil. We've done this conversation before. Even in evil campaigns, there should be somewhat of a hard limit. And to me, that's always always over the line.
Well, look at it this way. Unless you are a psychopath or sociopath, I get the two confused, being a little of both. How satisfying can that really be in the end? You know what I mean? How empty do you have to be that's okay for you, and that's actually like a net positive, other than oh my God, what did I do? I really don't deserve to live.
So I think Shauna, you might be confused on this. This isn't the game master using enticement magic on the players. This is players using enticement magic on NPCs. I mean, I guess it could go either direction, but it's mostly from PC towards PCs or NPCs.
Even if you have a DM that tries that nonsense, you were both in this game where more or less we told the GM no, and he wasn't our GM for much longer.
Yeah, we walked. So my biggest mantra of game mastery is actions have consequences. If you as a player, or as the character rather, if your character takes certain actions, you had best believe I am going to enforce very, very equal or sometimes disproportionate consequences depending on the act. So I think, setting that bar with your players immediately sets the tone. Like, dude, that is not going to, come into play. Now, Connell, you kind of touched on this earlier. This is my, I only have 2 more questions. This is the second to last one. The last one I think we'll do after Shadow's question. Do experienced role players have an advantage over inexperienced role players when it comes to romance? And should the experience of the player be a factor when considering including romance in the game?
Now, Love is Blind, deaf, dumb, and lobotomized.
Okay.
I might, like Shauner says right here, because he just read my mind. My NPC women look at the guy's character sheet before deciding on anything. I would actually use some of that. Maybe I'd use a die roll in there, do the reaction on each character. But to be honest, I usually have a mental image and somewhat of a file on my NPC, what they like and dislike, what they would be interested and not interested, what they're okay with, what they hate, all those things. And sometimes let's just go with the character's profession. There's a cleric, a thief, a magic user, and a fighter in the party, and ex tavern girl, is got a problem, and she thinks by falling in love with the right type of person that could solve the problem. Therefore, what the problem is might be more solvable by the priest, and therefore she would be more inclined to fall for the cleric. Or something like that. Or maybe it might literally be the character stats. That's why I really liked, I hate to sound shallow, but in the old days the comeliness stat made a whole lot more sense than you get a scar, now your charisma went down 2 points. That's clear, absolute lack of understanding of what the word charisma meant. There's some famous people out there whose comeliness score does not match their charisma score, and yet their charisma score was massively high and could charm the pants off of anyone, versus their comeliness score was over the top, and that's what's doing all the work. So
now
I think
the counter this, and I'm not trying to be too argumentative with the statement, but the counter side of this, if you look like German, I'm not talking about World War II. I'm talking about Germany. German soldiers during that era. I'm not talking about the war. I'm just talking about the era. It was truly women found German soldiers and higher up to be more attractive if they did have a scar from dueling that showed that they were manly. They did man things. Where if you're some pale face, no blemishes, you were considered not to be manly enough for the woman's taste.
Sure. And there are many tribes and other places throughout the world where tattoos and scars and brands and other things like that, take away from what we would consider that. But I see that as kind of a mixture of the two, comeliness and charisma, versus just straight up, classic good looks versus the ability to charm. That's why I think the comeliness that was brought in to AD&D, and of course Palladium uses it along with they've got physical beauty, and the equivalent of a charisma score. I think it's called mental something, but they're not the same thing always, and I don't think that they're interchangeable always. So having the two different numbers for me is not a bad idea. And when you're talking about romance, love comes in through the eyes. So, before a word is spoken, charisma score is meaningless. You know what I mean? How many times have we known some big, handsome dude who was an absolute bastard, but never had to say anything and still got all the women, right?
Technically, it'd be more through the nose because it's hormonal. But yeah, I'll give you the eyes. Sure, why not?
Well, I don't remember that expression, love comes in through the nose, but the one love comes in through the eyes is pretty world famous.
No, yeah, as you said, love is not blind; it's mildly retarded. What can I expect?
Yeah, dumb and lobotomized. So, what's your next question there, Jade? Or did we?
Actually, let's go ahead and get to your question number 8, and then I will ask my question, my final question.
Okay. Yeah, I don't mind if this one goes a little late, because a lot of people seem to be enjoying the conversation. Multi, if you're still listening, good night, buddy. We will see you on the next one. The last question is, what are some ways we can help our viewers to entertain the idea of a romantic relationship between a player character and an NPC without making it seem weird? Connell, you want to
So-
take this one? Or
Nope,
Jade,
go ahead.
you want to? Connell looks like he's actually still thinking about it. So Jade looks like
Okay.
you got her answer
So
primed ready.
yeah, so how to broach the topic without making it weird. One, and this is kind of why I asked, do experienced role players have an edge over inexperienced role players? Because your experienced role players are likely going to have an edge. However, the people who actually have romance and have lived actual romance in their life are going to have the most edge when it comes to this. So they, you want to interact with them to show the inexperienced players, in multiple senses of the term, what kind of interactions you're looking for or you're trying to draw out of them. And don't, to not make it weird is to, fade to black early. Like once the door closes, that's the fade to black. You don't go any further. You let them have their own headcanon. And you shut down questions about what happens in the fade to black. It's like those questions are for you to answer in your own mind. We at the table don't need to know it. That's for you to decide. And again, it happens naturally, and move it slow. Don't be fast with it. Don't make it awkward. One step at a time. And again, people who are in relationships and understand romance in a relationship standpoint, they're going to be the ones who will likely take the lead on showing what it's like and interacting with the game master in that way. And that'll be for your inexperienced players to observe and learn from.
I like that answer. I didn't think about the, older new player sort of dynamic of a game.
More experienced role players will likely have had those interactions more than the inexperienced. But an inexperienced player could be in a very long-lived relationship, and they might actually have more romantic experience than a experienced role player. So, I mean, you could play off both sides of the card there.
I can't help but to think how the game has changed over the decades. Because normally the guys playing this game when it very first started, they weren't, they weren't the guys getting the girls at the sock hop. I mean, the closest they came to a girl was in a comic book, and now it's completely, the game has the hobby is completely more normalized.
Normalized, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just the generation of the players. I mean, if you're playing with a bunch of old gamers, and trying to bring romance into the game, I think it would just be be a no-go. I think it'd be shot down. Where somewhere from, I want to say, I hate to put addition on this, maybe 3.5 and forwards, where you'll start to get more girls at the table, or more not the, ooh, there's a girl type of guys. I want to do the, bullshit that we used to get. I think it becomes a little bit more easier to venture down that thought processing. Not making it weird, having a romance where there's a bunch of dudes sitting around a table and it's all headcanon. Man, you got to know your table. You just have to know your table. Because I can see that going bad quick or playing out great. I mean, just got to know your table.
Yeah, and Shauner said it early on in the night. Like you set a rating for the game, like
Oh yeah,
E, PG, R, whatever.
Nothing past PG-13. at the highest rating. No one wants the detail. This is not Deer Penthouse. Knock that shit off. So yeah,
I don't know. So there were some games I was involved in that went that direction, and that's because we were young, ignorant kids, and someone had bought the book for erotic fantasy. Again, we were young, ignorant kids, and we didn't actually understand romance at all.
How long has that damn book been around?
2004, 2005? No, earlier than that. Good Lord. I want to say very early 2000s because it was written for 3.0. Yeah.
Just trying to catch up with the chat here. This mind control thing. Yeah, that's there's nothing I hate more than the DM taking over my character, except when this sort of thing happens. There are certain, if it's a mind flayer or you're dealing with the Telosians or something like that, or psychic powers or something like that. That's a thing. That's gonna,
Oh yeah, there's a.
The best you can do is let the players, give them a little bit of a warning. It's like, you're going to the planet of the mind witches. You may want to rethink that. You know what I mean, or something. The Illithids live down there. Okay, well, let's see if we can find some protection versus, mind, stuff. But otherwise,
there we go. Scott put it in the chat. The Book of Erotic Fantasy was published in October 2003.
Taking over a player's character is bad enough. It being mind flares, as you said, it being possession by a ghost or a demon, or something of that nature, some kind of psychic damage. But to not only take control of a player's character, then go do that. I mean, I'm of the opinion then your DM card membership should be ripped up. Just automatic.
Kind of, yeah. That's like, there's some serious issues with that kind of behavior. You have to really wonder, and you're going to be giving that DM the side eye or that player the side eye for the rest of your relationships. Like, what do you do when you go home, kind of thing?
I don't want to know.
I don't want to know.
Yeah, exactly. And I want players at my table and in my life and friends and stuff that I can trust, with lots of things, not just picking me up at the airport. I don't want to, have to worry.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here for tonight, is to try to cut off that sort of behavior. I'm pretty certain, I'm going to go with 99.999% for certain that none of the people in the chat tonight, none of the people I'm looking at on the screen are anything like that. I've been wrong before, but I got a good feeling about you guys.
I only ran into that once, and that as a player, and me, Jade, and the other 4 people at the time gave that DM the boot.
Because believe it or not, my favorite author, Roger Zelazny, he actually had 2 characters in 2 separate works that did some really questionable things when it came to romance. That especially for back then, was incredibly iffy. But having talked to him afterwards, if you read the books, you'll find out that those things had horrendous consequences. And sometimes with power, people will sort of lose the ability to turn that switch off. And what better way to show that in a novel than that? We did just have the era of 50 Shades of Grey, so it's not the worst thing that's ever been in print, but at the gaming table, there's just no place for it. Keith, again, thank you for joining the show tonight. I look forward to the next one. No, you're still here.
Now, to not so much devil's advocate, but to on a very other side of the coin, is if you're with the group that is a healthy whatever scenario where everybody in the party has agreed to that thought processing, that style playing, that's fine as long as everybody is A, an adult, and B, everybody signs off on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of condemning, it might not be my kink, but it might be some people's kink. And as long as everybody's of age,
Yeah, that's still fade to black.
Yeah, that's still fade to black.
I'm still fade to black.
Everybody at the table has to agree, has to be completely on board beforehand, and of age.
Yeah, like I said, fade to black when it gets to that. So I think the final question I would like people to consider, at the very least, it doesn't even have to be answered, but to consider, when running romance in a game, when and how should that romance end? And I ask this because for some, romance could end in tragedy. It could end in a mutual parting of ways. It could even end, peacefully, as a means or a capstone to a story. But how and when should it end?
That's a toughie. Besides the obvious answer, it depends on the situation. I like to go with the tropes. Death is a good one. The movie Bicentennial Man was one of Robin Williams' greatest movies. When he played a more serious role, other than What Dreams May Come, being the apogee of his work, in my opinion. I know most people are going to disagree, but that ending of that love story was classic. They, within seconds of one another, they left this world for a better one. But the classic, he or she was murdered, and now that sparks a whole new story arc because there is no resurrection. Conan and Malid, that was freaking epic. That haunted him for the rest of his days. No matter who he ended up eventually with, there was no other. It was just, that was it. They were meant to be together, but they weren't. He even tried to bring her back, and that was horrific. But there are others, if you want to go into the more modern sort of, divorce kind of thing, I think that just taints the whole idea of, fantasy or science fiction. No one wants to see a court proceedings, Kramer versus Kramer, in your role-playing game. That's just don't do that. Find some other way. For the most part, most DMs want to hurry up and get that character off the screen anyways. You know what I mean? For whatever reason. But if you guys have a better suggestion, I really can't think of one.
I like Scott's, have it start organically and having it end organically. Although, depends on the party. Really depends on the party. Having your teammate that is the bard being your lawyer in a divorce a trial could be at least for one session that you're going to be missing like two people and you can't really move the story without them. Having a one session divorce trial could be fun for the bard and some of the other players that are there. I know that's kind of, I don't know if I would say dumb. But I think, like I said, if you got like 5 people at your table and 2 people can't show up and the bard's there, the guy who has the wife that wants to leave him there, and you got the other guy, you could do a one session divorce court and just have the bard have fun with it. The bard doesn't get a lot of play to begin with.
The new bard doesn't get a lot of play. The old bards, I'm playing with one right now. The old bards were freaking absolute powerhouses of unimaginable ability. The new
Right.
Bard is just god awful
I
from
just,
second edition on. Right,
you need
right. I've
all
seen them in.
you need all 5 people to keep the story going in a direction, and then you can't do it. You want to run game, but you need 5, and you only have 3, so you have to come up with something off the fly. I want to divorce that bitch. I want to divorce that asshat, and off to the races we go. The bar gets a little bit of play. Everybody gets a good chuckle out of it. No one goes home disappointed.
So the reason I ask the question of how and when should a romance end, and I'm very much a romantic at heart. Like, I think it should end naturally. It should end organically, as Scott said. Old age is a good one, but if your player character does something so god awful horrific in the game, and the significant other finds out about that god awful thing the character did, that might be grounds for them to go no and leave. Like, that could trigger something like that. And those again, that's the whole fame infamy thing that I talked about earlier, or asked about earlier. These things should, actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences could be the romance that the character is really, involved in. If the characters, take too dark a turn, their romantic interest might just become either their savior or the one that ends them. I've seen a character that was a paladin, an NPC was a paladin, and she tried to save the character who was turning evil. The character was doing unspeakable things, and the paladin NPC, the way it was portrayed was their heart was breaking every time they found out a new evil that the PC had done. And it was a driving force for change in the player character, because they realized all of the things they were doing was compounding tenfold onto the paladin NPC that they were supposed to love. Was interested in them. So eventually, I believe they split. I can't actually remember how that one ended, because I'd swapped characters 3 times in that game. So I kind of lost track of what was happening to that NPC. But character actions, player character actions, have weight in the world, in the campaign and the story, and those actions should also impact the relationships, the romances, in positive and negative ways, depending on the actions taken. Those are some of the consequences that can come into play. So, keep those things in mind as game masters and even as players. Keep all the things that we've talked about in mind, because it can really only elevate your game.
Yep. I like the declared dead if gone too long. And what you just said, I hadn't considered that. If the character's a wizard and starting to raise dead and all kinds of things that would scare the normies and the townsfolk, that definitely could come into play. And if the PC is gone for a really long time on an epic quest, like with no word, no contact. The Iliad is a good example. She's gonna move
held
on.
out to the end. She held out to the end.
Right, no, but I mean something like that, where everybody else decided for her.
Oh yeah, well, it's time for you to remarry. I don't want to. Too bad.
Yeah, right, exactly. That could definitely come into play. I didn't know there was an RPG based on courtroom antics. I've lost a little bit of my soul finding out that information. Thanks for sharing.
I want to get a hold of it now.
I don't.
And actually, not all societies have grounds for divorce. or if they do, it's really, really hard in some places even today. But yes, I suppose that in a fantasy world, they're not going to put up with a lot of crap, or maybe they do have to, and maybe he or she decides to end the marriage the good old fashioned way with something in the food or the drink. It's happened in the real world, and
Shit, it still happens in the real world.
yeah, you're right. Um,
But I mean, like I said, these are things to consider when game mastering and adding romance to the game. If your PCs are starting off like doing really good acts, people are going to be interested in them. But if they start doing evil acts, those same people might start losing interest in them. But you might also have those crazy ones. Oh, that they're doing it because of this reason. They're doing it because of
Sure.
they had no choice. You might have those crazies as well. So divorced by assassins.
Right.
I don't disagree with what you guys are saying, but at the same time, if I'm 2 kingdoms over and my love interest is 4 kingdoms over, there's not Fox News. How the hell she know what I'm up to?
Because people talk, stories travel.
Word does travel.
Stories travel, especially if you're the big damn hero. Especially if you're the big damn hero.
Or the evil guy living
Stories
in the tower,
travel.
Yeah, I mean, obviously within a week or two, maybe not, but 6 months or 3 months.
Even using that argument, you're the good guy, and by the time it gets back to your wife, you have 3 children, and you're ugly, and you have now a peg leg because of.
I'm sorry, Connell. Scott just came up with the ultimate answer to shoot down everything you were about to say. Connell,
Women
know.
know.
Yeah, they do. I hate to agree, but it's true. Fortunately,
not the woman I know.
Pure as the driven snow and have nothing to worry about. With that, do we have any last thoughts before I cue the music and say adios and good night to everybody? Because I think we'll all agree we managed to make it through this episode. It was actually one of the best episodes we've done in a while. There were so many of you great people hanging out with us tonight, just keeping us on our toes with the chat. We barely made it through. Actually, technically, we had to go 30 minutes extra. Thanks to you guys. Thanks to Jade for all the extra questions. That was really helpful. Connell, I wish you could have come in sooner, but real life, and if you're actually playing a game, that trumps all the other excuses. Sorry, I was in a game. Ask R. Keith Andrews. He knows. I gotta bail out on his show a couple of nights a week because I have games. More and more games are popping up than I would have ever dreamed of playing online. Keith has never played in an online game. I cannot wait to get him into one. It's actually been one of the smartest decisions I've made in a long time, is that playing online. I get to be in Rick's game this Sunday on 28 millimeter RPG. If you guys have not checked that out, come and give me a hard time in the chat as I struggle, not really struggle, but really put my feet to the fire in one of the truest role-playing platforms there is right now with Rick's Shadow of the Stars. I can't imagine where he got that title from. It's the first game I ran in was a lot of fun. This one with more players proves to be doubly, quadruply so. For those of you guys who have not tried it, give it a chance. And while you're doing that, make sure you go and check out Jade's channel, Connell's channel, Bo Paints Minis, Squirrel Hermit, The Crafting Gamer. I don't know if I missed anybody else out there. Scott, if you have a channel, let us know what it is before I hit the music. Anything you guys want to add before we really do hit the road?
Yeah. I want to say thank you too for letting me jump in late. I was gaming. I ran out of dust dryness, so the DM had nothing else to bitch about. That's a story for another time, children. But no, other than his game and with RPG, I and him at sometime this coming Sunday will be talking about one of the best romantic movies that was ever made. And I'm not even talking about Princess Bride. I'm talking about Casablanca. And we'll be talking about that this coming Sunday.
Super Bowl Sunday?
One of the most famous ones.
I thought we were doing it this Sunday because we're gamers. We're not, we don't play sports. Most of us don't know what the outside looks like. Grass? What's that?
I mow it.
What
every 2
I
weeks.
go mow every other week.
Mom, that death ball in the sky is burning me. Can I go back into the basement with my friends? No, honey. You need some
Yes, the
vitamin
cursed
D.
sky burner.
Yeah.
Good night, Laura. I hope to see you again next week.
So next week on Gatekeepers, it'll be over on my channel, over at the tavern, and we're going to be discussing what is, well, no other way of saying it, railroading. What is it and what is it not? So that's what we're going to be doing next week. So up to see you over in the tavern.
Isn't that a place on Monopoly? You have to collect 4 of them and land on them.
Have a good night, everyone.
Everybody. Have a great week. Thanks for showing up. Make sure you hit those buttons and do those things. Have a great week. We will see you guys real soon.